And if you haven't gone through the experience or taken the right birth education classes or have a doula that can prepare you, you don't know what birth culture means. I had no idea that there was a system in place to basically tell you what you're going to do and not trust your own body. And it wasn't until afterwards that I had that realization that my body built a perfectly formed baby over the course of 9 months. And yet when it comes to the timing and how birth is going to lay out, we say, no, you can build the baby, but you can't expel it.
Welcome to the Birth Education Center podcast, hosted by myself, Care Messer, an entrepreneur, birth educator, and doula. My team and I want to help you discover your options in birth and postpartum, how to find your voice, and how to use that voice to navigate our maternal healthcare system. You and your baby are not just a number. This information includes doulas too. Now let's get started. Today I have Katie on with me, and we're going to talk about Katie and Greg's two births. Greg's not here because he's entertaining children. And I really want you to understand the reason Katie came on today. Katie does not want anybody to experience the kind of birth that she had the first time, the disempowerment, the gaslighting, all that kind of stuff. So we're going to talk about that first. And Katie, welcome to today's show. I'm really excited to talk about both your births because reading over everything, I got really excited because they're not do-over births exactly when you have a second one that's different, but kind of they are. And the whole purpose of why you're here today is to help people not have to have a do-over birth.
Absolutely.
I want to read something to our audience. When I bring people on for their birth stories, I ask them what they thought the theme of their birth was. And I'm going to read this word for word. When she talks about Harper's birth, she said, submission, out of control, a cascade of interventions, don't question authority, and trust them in what they're choosing the right path for you. And then with Rhett's birth, empowerment, trust in myself, trust in my knowledge and abilities, and above all else, my own intuition. Polar opposites. So I'm excited to talk today about your birth. So let's go into first birth with Harper. You're pregnant, you're excited, first try. We all love that. Shoot that egg and you got a baby going. That's great. And what did you do to prepare or not prepare for Harper's birth?
Oh gosh. Well, honestly, not a whole lot. We were in the midst of a house renovation, our bathroom renovation. So I was knee deep in that kind of stuff. I did take a hospital-based birth class. It was 2020, so peak COVID. She was born in July of 2020. So basically all of our education was online. It was not even Zoom. I don't think Zoom was a big thing yet then, but a pre-recorded class for childbirth and breastfeeding and all that kind of stuff. So, and it was very service level.
So it was through the hospital, like pre-recorded class.
Correct. So I thought I was doing what I was supposed to. I did ask about whether I could have a doula, but that was not allowed at the time because you're only allowed to have one support person. So they said, you can choose between your husband or a doula. So I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'll have my husband. And honestly, in my
Kind of
head,
not a choice.
Right, exactly. And honestly, I think it was a week before, maybe 2 weeks before, they were just starting to allow your partner in the operating room. And then just, I think a month before that was letting them in the hospital in general. And I had to do a COVID test and the whole gamut. So anyone that's gone through birth in 2020 knows the deal. But I thought that I was doing everything that I was supposed to. And honestly, I was just naive. I thought the nurses were going to be like that doula-like support. So I didn't really second guess that at all. And just was kind of like, oh, I'm kind of a go with the flow type person, not really make waves. And I just thought everything was going to go perfectly, and my doctors have my best interest at heart, and I feel like I'm a pretty tough person. I have a high pain threshold. I just thought everything was going to go super smoothly.
Well, and I think one thing that people hear, parents, especially new parents hear, is don't be tied to that birth plan. You've got to go with the flow and allow things to happen. Yes, absolutely. You have to go with the flow of where the baby's positioned, how they want to come out, etc. But there's a go with the flow mentality of, I don't really even need to prepare because everything's going to be fine, whether that's total delusion or it's avoiding fear, The idea of pain, any kind of discomfort, whatever that is such a common theme for new parents, for millennial parents right now, and I'm not gonna just pin it on that generation because my generations was the same way. The doctors know everything. All I have to do is show up. Everyone's got my back. But no one's
Exactly.
actually recovering from your birth. Your baby is also recovering from that birth, and just going with the flow is kind of but do everything you can to prepare ahead of time. And what you don't
Right.
know, you need to find out to know. So, yeah,
Absolutely.
that is just common birth culture. So, it's no harm, no foul to you. It's our common birth culture because I did the
Right.
same thing.
Yeah, the thought of listening to my intuition at that point was like, no, that didn't even cross my mind. Oh, my gut is telling me, even though it was, my brain kind of superseded that. Well, like, no, your doctor knows best. Listen to them and don't question authority.
Well,
Yeah.
so let's start with, did labor start spontaneously? Were you at a doctor's appointment? Like, how did this process for you start?
So I went for my like 41-week appointment. It was like 40 weeks and 5 days, so a couple days beforehand, and kind of your typical checkup where they're doing the measurements and whatnot. And so, of course, my doctor starts talking about induction, and I push back. I think she started saying, "Well, you need to come back at midnight, or you can come back like over the weekend, or I think on Monday, maybe," she said. And I was like, "I really want to wait until the labor starts spontaneously." And I almost seemed like an afterthought, like, the appointment was, like, almost over, and she's, "Well, let's do an ultrasound and see what things are looking like." So, in hindsight, I truly believe that was, like, just a manipulation tactic, basically. So, she does the ultrasound, and, lo and behold, she discovers I have low fluids and that I need to be induced right away. And so I'm just like flustered at this point. Like I didn't bring my bag, which seems ridiculous. Like it's my 41-week appointment. I should have packed a bag just in case, but I didn't. And we live in Oceanside and we're delivering in Irvine. So it's like quite a drive. So I'm like, well, can I go home and wait for my husband to get home from work and then we'll come back tonight? And she's, no, you need to go right now. You're going to risk having a stillbirth if you leave. So that obviously shut me up real quick. And I think that from that moment, that really put me in like that flight or flight response of when your doctor uses the word stillbirth, that like sears in your brain. And I was just like, okay, whatever you say, you know. And during that appointment, she had checked me and a cervical exam, and I was at 2 centimeters. And she performed a membrane sweep, which was, I didn't know. She didn't like ask me or, ask for consent or anything. And I thought she was just checking my cervix, and it was like so uncomfortable. And oh, wow, is that like what it's gonna feel like every time when a doctor checks my dilation? And she was like, "Oh, that was I did a membrane sweep." It's like, "Oh, wow, thanks for the heads up."
Thanks for
So that was
assaulting me because for our listeners, that is assault. There is no consent and no discussion of what that means and what the benefits and the risks are.
yeah,
Oh, that's
it felt very
infuriating. I'm so
violating, and
sorry.
it was very violating, and if I probably would have consented to it if she had asked about it, but I was just so thrown off guard, and so, again, that was, like, another thing that just kinda, like, puts you in your place, makes you feel like you're, like, a subordinate and, like, you just take it, basically. And just to backtrack a little bit, there were, like, a couple red flags. I think at, like, my 38-week appointment, I recall overhearing her on the phone with another patient. Yeah, I don't think she had them on speaker. That seems like that would be like a HIPAA violation. But just the tone in her voice in talking to I got the impression she was talking to the dad, and the mom had like mastitis, and he was like asking what they could do and that she had a fever and whatever. And just the tone in her voice, she was so rude and not sympathetic. And basically was, well, I can't do anything unless I see her, and I wouldn't advise that she come in here because COVID and yada yada. And I just remember being like, God, she was like really harsh with them. Just thought, at that point, I was 38 weeks. I wasn't making a change at that point. And in my head, I knew she wouldn't be the one like delivering my baby. And that was kind of my mindset the whole way through. And part of the reason I switched to Kaiser from my previous insurance provider, because it was like a flat rate of $500 to birth your baby, like no matter what, whether you get an epidural or a C-section or whatever. And so I felt, oh, that's it doesn't matter if I'm close with my doctor or if she holds my hand and whispers sweet nothings to me. So that was one of the things. And then at my 30, I want to know, maybe my appointments kind of got staggered. So I think I was like 39 and a half weeks, let's say. And when the nurse was scheduling me for my 41-week appointment, she's okay. And then they'll probably schedule your induction on this day before while schedule. I'm like, well, why? Why would they schedule an induction? Like they don't even know where I'll be at that point. It's just she then kind of like backtracked and realized that I was like wanting to do things more naturally. So that was another red flag that I kind of like got nervous about. But you don't know what you don't know at the time. So,
We brush those
anyways,
off, right? We don't realize that we are such a part of the system when we birth in a hospital, and the culture of that system is conveyor belt. So when you want to do something out of the norm, spontaneous labor, allow my body to go into labor and just do things your way, it doesn't fit the culture. So it is,
absolutely
and you're made to feel like you're the outsider when what
right,
you're actually doing is just following the lead of your body and nature. But our system is very much set up like culture, like a medicalized conveyor belt. And that's one of the
exactly,
things that's really hard as an educator to not freak parents out about that. But at the same time, because 98% of us birth in the hospital, right? But we have to understand what that system entails and how we fit into it or not fit into it because
right.
it goes continuously whether we participate or not.
Absolutely. And if you haven't gone through the experience or taken the right birth education classes or have a doula that can prepare you, you don't know what birth culture means. I had no idea that there was a system in place to basically tell you what you're going to do and not trust your own body. And it wasn't until afterwards that I like had that realization that like my body built a perfectly formed baby over the course of 9 months, and yet when it comes to the timing and how birth is gonna lay out, we say, "No, you can build the baby, but you can't expel it. You don't know when, you don't know how." And it's backwards. I think we need to take some notes from nature and let those things play their course.
Because the planet is populated for a reason and it's been populated for many years before we had buildings, epidural carts, surgeries, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. So, yeah, unfortunately, it wasn't until after that I dug into some of that the history of midwives and how like hospitals and OBGYNs like came to be and all the horrible practices that they did to perfect their skills. But yeah. So anyway, I sauntered onto the labor and delivery floor right in Irvine. And I think I hung around for an hour before they admitted me. So she had done the membrane too. So I was like starting to cramp a little bit. By the time I got checked in, my appointment was like 10:30 in the morning, 12 o'clock, I get admitted. They checked me again at around 1. And I was at like, I remember them saying, you have 3 centimeters, but I could stretch you to 4, which again, in hindsight, I'm like, okay, so obviously my body was progressing on its own. Like, why didn't I have the presence of mind to be like, I'm out of here? Or and B, as the medical professional, oh, you're going into labor like soon, probably. But
Yeah,
that's,
because if they need to monitor you, you're there. So just
right.
leave me be, and if it takes 3 days, it takes 3 days, whatever. I'm in the hospital, y'all can check me. I feel safer here. You feel safe having me here. But it's
Right.
not like that. It's how
Yeah.
fast can we get this baby out?
Right.
And was
Right. And
Greg with you at this point?
no, not yet. And I had that intuition, like I wanted to leave so badly. I even walked out to my car because I was like, in my mind, I'm like, oh, I'm going to go to my appointment and I'm going to go make these returns to Nordstrom and look through the baby section. And then I'm going to go to Target, get some last minute thing, yada, yada. So I literally walked out to my car and I looked at all my things in the car that I like, my errands I was going to run. And I like ate 5 snacks because I knew that they weren't going to let me eat. Super. And I remember I couldn't get a hold of my husband at first, by the way. So I'm like waiting for him to call me back. And so I call my mom. I'm like, what do I do? Like, I, I'm not ready, you know? But it's like your doctor says you're going to do this. You're going to risk having a stillbirth. So it was, of course, my mom's advice is like, you got to listen to the doctor. And that's
Absolutely.
my, so they start like Pitocin around, let's see, like 1:30. Okay. So that actually went okay at first. Finally, my husband gets there after they do a nasal and a throat swab. And he gets there and we're like comfy cozy in the hospital bed. We're watching a movie, like waiting for things to kick in. And honestly, I think we're like a little too comfortable. And the doctor comes in and, oh, I think it's time to break your waters just to get things moving. I'm like, well, are there any risks to that? And he's, well, it's just another tool in our toolbox to get things to progress. And sometimes it can lead to a higher risk of C-section, but you're progressing well, blah, 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 whatever. So I'm like, okay. Which all again in hindsight, like if my fluids were low and that was such a concern, then why are we breaking my waters?
Absolutely, and you're progressing, so what's the rush, right?
Right.
It is
Right.
our critical thinking literally goes out the window when we don't know what we don't know.
Yep.
Yeah,
And you're just looking to them to
and
tell you what to do, what's the right thing.
fear is in the way, right? We're gonna
Yeah.
listen no matter what, even if we hear something that we go, "Huh?" We're scared at that point.
Yeah, and I was still feeling good, like, I was having very, very light cramps, I wouldn't even call them, like, period light cramps, and I was already on PIT, and so I'm like, "Okay, I'm sure it'll be fine," and then basically as soon as they broke my waters, oh my god, that next contraction, like, it went from 0 to 60 so quickly that I was so unprepared for the intensity of what that was gonna do. So, yeah, basically, I was just, like, pacing around the room. Oh my, it was just absolutely horrible. And I
That would
had
have been
told them,
nice if the doctor had said that might be a side effect.
well, and I had asked my OB like weeks prior, oh, if I am induced, what does that gonna is that gonna make labor more painful? And she said no, which is I think a bold faced lie. It's absolutely gonna be more intense.
Wow.
Yeah. Yes. So I can say anyone that's tried to do an unmedicated birth with Pitocin, oh my god, you're a superhuman I don't know how you did it.
Superhuman.
It was
Yes,
horrible.
superhuman. And then with your water broken as well, because that the pressure
Yes.
is at 100% at that point too.
Unbearable, unbearable. Oh, and I think because my body hadn't naturally done that, that oh my yeah. When your
There's
contractions are, like, gradually building, I think your brain and your body, like, can adhere to that, but when it's like
yeah, your
yeah,
hormones are producing oxytocin, which is a painkiller, right? That is 200 times more powerful than morphine actually. But that's what natural progression is, not
right.
augmentation with pit and all the things. Yeah.
Yeah. So kind of in the throes of that, I was like looking for some like doula-like support from the nurses, like asking, okay, how far along am I? Like, when am I going to get checked next? I'm like, okay, I'm with how this much pain, I have to be close, like having the baby. So like the next time they come and check me, I think I was only like at 5 centimeters, and I was like, holy shit, there's no way if that it took this long to get to 5 centimeters, and I was already at 2 or 3 when I got checked in pre even starting pitocin. And I don't think that they have a whole lot of experience supporting unmedicated birth. So just some of the comments that I got were just, oh, well, you could labor like this for 12 to 18 more hours. And that was from the midwife that was coming and checking on me. And one of them said, when I was like, well, what are the benefits of not getting an epidural? She said, well, it can help with pushing sometimes. That was it.
It's disheartening to me that nobody had compassion for what you're going through in those moments, because where have we lost that? Like, this person is desperate for some help, and we go, it's going to be really bad. Instead of saying, what can I do to help you feel more comfortable? That
Right.
does not make sense. Like, where's our compassion for another human being? I am
Right.
so sorry that that
Wow.
happened.
Thank you. Thank you. The worst one was one of them was like, "You're not gonna win any awards for doing it unmedicated." And that's just I think that was kinda like the nail in the coffin that I was just like, "Oh, you're right. No one's gonna hand me a medal at the end of this. Like, I'll get the epidural." And then okay, another thing they don't tell you when they break your waters is that, like, fluids are gonna continually gush out of you at random moments. So while I'm trying to walk around the room, yeah, I had no idea. Still uncomfortable. You stand up from the bed and just like, which
Because you're still
nobody
making
told me
fluid
that.
and babies' heads moving side to side. Yep, it goes everywhere.
Exactly. Exactly. Nobody told me that. So then they're like, okay, well, if you want the epidural, like we need to get some fluids in you. You have to be hooked up to an IV for at least an hour before they'll start the epidural. So I'm like, holy shit. So then they hook up the IV and the nurse is literally like squeezing the bag, trying to get it in my veins faster. I can literally feel the cool sensation going in my veins. It was the weirdest thing ever. And so they come and do the epidural, and that went fine. And literally like an hour later, they come and check on me, and I was 10 centimeters. So it was like pretty
You
quick
just
from
needed the whoosh.
I just needed that like relaxation, I guess. And so basically they're like, okay, let's get ready to push. So, and that was at, I want to say, what did they say? I was 10 centimeters. That was at like right around 11 to midnight. I started pushing at 1:15 in the morning. Obviously, I haven't eaten or drinking anything since the morning before I got admitted. And I basically pushed through the night until 7 a.m. It was excruciating. I mean, it wasn't excruciating because I felt a little bit of pressure, but nothing like I was feeling before. But it
You're
was
just
very
tired,
like
like, mentally
so
exhausted.
tired. So tired. And I remember like being on the clock. Like there is one of those circle ticking clocks like right in front of my face near the door. And I remember them saying something like, oh, you can only push for 4 hours or something like that. So I remember that being like an anxiety. Oh my God, I got to get the baby out in under this timeline or I'll have a C-section. And so like around like that, I want to say 4 to 5 a.m. time, they start talking about like C-section. And I'm like, no, 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 give me a little while longer. And they must have been really busy that night because the doctors were not coming in frequently at all. I think they were like performing all sorts of C-sections. So I remember them saying another gal that had been pushing for a while that she was getting wheeled off to have a C-section. So that's just like looming in your brain. Oh my God, that poor mom. And what is the most frustrating part is that towards the end, like you could see a sliver of her head when I would push. So she was like right there. She was like at the end. And I think I had just because I had started pushing so early on before she was really even in my birth canal that everything was just so swollen. Like they wheeled over a little mirror thing. And I could not believe what my vagina looked like. It was like so, so swollen.
Fluids have been pumped into you, like, it's a whole thing, how your body
Yes.
changes in order to adapt to the cascade of interventions that are showing up along the way.
Yes. So I think, yeah, everything was just so swollen. And then that same doctor came in around, I want to maybe 6 a.m. and said, okay, I think we really need to consider C section. Like you've been pushing for 5 hours. The baby is not wanting to come out this way. And so I was like, no, I want to get a second opinion. So waited for another doctor to come in. Um, and she was a little bit more like sympathetic or empathetic and watched me push for a while and dug her hands in there and was trying to like feeling around and stuff. And basically the consensus was like the risks outweighed the benefits of trying to do vacuum or forceps or, at that point I'm like, cut my vagina, give me an episiotomy, like get her. She's right there. Like, how can you not just like, boop? But they basically did not think that that was a good option. So finally, after that second opinion said C-section, and I'm like, okay, I guess I have to do that. So sign all sorts of paperwork. They wheel me off. That original doctor that kept recommending the C-section, like I was obviously in tears, really upset. And I remember her coming over and she's like, "Why are you so upset? Like, why don't you want to have C-section?"
Course.
Just blew me away. I don't want to be cut open. What do you mean? Like, why are you even asking me that? So just like zero, it's not even empathy. Like she truly did not understand why I was upset, which is baffling to me. So they like wheel me into the operating room and I literally could feel them like pushing her head up back inside of my abdomen. They give me more drugs. You're like shaking uncontrollably. It's so cold. It's so bright. It was like, and I had been up for so many hours and no food, that whole thing. It was just really horrible experience, honestly. And so finally they like pull her out. I hear her cry. They take her over to the little, not incubator, but to weigh her. And I guess they had called in the NICU team just in case because I had pushed for so long. Her APGAR scores were great. I think she was at a 9 when she was born. So she was in perfect health. They brought her over to me for maybe 5 minutes. We took a couple pictures and then her and Greg went and they did skin to skin while they like finished stitching me up. And I literally can remember them saying, okay, uterus is back in. I that maybe it was like
Things you don't ever wanna
hallucinating.
hear in your lifetime, right?
Yes. You're like, "Oh, shit."
Just
My
a
whole body
regular
was
day in
just
the OR here.
yep, yep. Just literally they're just having, like, little chit chat. You feel like you're having, like, an out of body experience. It's the weirdest thing because you can't see them. I can't see anything except for the bright lights, and it's just, scary experience.
One of the things that I've heard over and over from parents is because if they don't know to ask for the chit chat to be cut down, with a gentle cesarean that you're like, "Hey, this is actually my birth. I don't wanna hear about your vacations. I don't wanna hear about a fight you have going on with another nurse. Can you keep the small talk to just talking to me about the birth of my baby?" Because if you think about it, it's not even their actual intent. Surgeries are done when a patient is asleep, but not most cesareans. And so
Right.
their regular surgeries are just, "Hey, what's going on? Blah, blah, blah." And they're getting to
Right.
know their comrades, right? It is disconnected and disjointed because they're not taking into account that you're awake and this is the birth of your baby. And
Right.
that's something that really could easily change in our medical system if we were more aware and intentional.
Yeah. And that this is like a monumental experience for me. You're just like chit chatting away, but that was the least of my, I guess, concerns with the whole situation, honestly. So we wheel me out. They basically put her on the breast right away. And honestly, I don't know if it's the drugs or just like being tired, but I was just like so out of it. It was like you're just like you look at pictures of me from it does not even look like me. I just literally look like I was drugged through hell, and I felt like that too. So we go to our recovery room or whatever. And I mean, it was obviously amazing to see Harper. She is so beautiful. So yeah, that was basically the birth. And then just a little cherry on top. After the epidural had worn off, they like went to get me out of bed and I completely collapsed on the floor. And they're like, okay, well, let's wait a little longer. Maybe you were on an epidural for 12 hours or whatever. Wait a little bit longer, try again. And one of my legs, my right leg, just could not bear weight. And like they send in all these doctors to do looking at my leg and see what's going on. And basic, long story short, I had this very rare complication called femoral nerve neuropathy, where basically, I mean, they don't really know. They did not give me like any answers. I'm like, well, is this from the epidural? Is this from what happened? My theory is that I was in weird pushing positions, trying in the 6 hours of pushing trying to get her out that I must have pinched a nerve or partially severed one or something. And I basically lost the use of my right leg for about 3 months postpartum. So that
It's
was
so
so
hard.
horrible.
I've had moms experience that, and I do think you're kind of on the right track with pushing in really contorted. Because if you're numb, you don't know if it hurts,
Yep.
and you can do some damage that way.
Yep. So that was like really scary. And I think that I was just kind of in such a daze from the experience. But like I had to use a walker. They gave me like a leg brace, and those were obviously very difficult to use with a newborn baby. So I basically learned how to like I would just hyperextend my leg and then I could walk because the upper part of my thigh worked and like my ankle, but if I like tried to bend that joint or whatever at my knee would just buckle and I would fall. So trying to kick my leg up onto like the coffee table or, get my leg up on the couch or whatever, like I physically have to pull my leg up from like the knee down. So that was horrible. My husband was working at the time at a job where he was leaving at 5 in the morning. So basically, after the first, I think he got 2 weeks off, which just flies when you have a newborn. But when he went back to work, I had to come downstairs with him and I would sidestep holding onto like the railings, trying to get downstairs or like crawl basically to get down up and down the stairs. So I'd come down with him in the morning, like still in my jammies. He'd bring down everything I would need for the day for me and the baby. And I just stayed downstairs the entire day by
And it's
myself.
2020, so we're afraid to ask for more help because what if I get contaminated? Like, it was the fear in that whole scenario for my postpartum families was a horrible recovery in most cases. And when they were recovering from surgical birth, it was kinda good the other way because they were just cuddling with their baby and they couldn't take visitors. So
Right.
there's kind of both sides to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I see both sides. It was yeah. I mean, it was amazing and also horrible at the same time. I get that one-on-one time. I got so many but yeah, I mean, I think that's something I hear a lot and that I definitely identify with is that like postpartum is so lonely, especially if you have a husband that's working outside of the house or partner. It was really, really hard for me to be home all day. And even I have like family close by and stuff, but to schedule that stuff, like for basically the first couple months, like I couldn't drive. My right leg, I couldn't go anywhere. So people had to come see me. And like once that first like couple weeks passes, like everyone goes back to their normal life.
Yes,
Your whole
do.
world has been turned upside down, but theirs hasn't. They're like, I gotta go back to my kids or my usual activities. And you just feel like kind of left behind a little bit. So it was tough.
So after that postpartum period, baby is getting older and you're reflecting about your birth, knowing you want other kids. What was starting to go through your mind? Where did you start with all of that?
For a long time, I was like, I'm not having any more kids. I could not go through that again. I I developed pretty intense postpartum anxiety, I would say. I would say a touch of depression, but mostly anxiety. I think just from that like loss of control in her birth. But I felt like I wanted to have some semblance of control of my baby, which if anyone's had a baby, that's impossible. Sure. You cannot control their sleep, how long they sleep, how much food they eat, the schedule. Like that was really my main anxiety. So that it took me like be 6 to 7 months. That's right around when I like started going back to work. And honestly, like my breaking point was like I was literally watching the monitor on my phone while driving to work and I'm literally having anxiety. Like I'm not even there. Okay. This is not normal. Like I am not being the best mom I can be for Harper. Like she doesn't want me to be unhappy and feel this way. So I'm like, I gotta do something. And so I I was still on Kaiser at the time. So called them up and luckily I got like an opening right away with the psychiatrist, like literally the same day, which was interesting experience. They basically just are literally on a computer, like not even looking at you. It was a Zoom. But he's like asking this list of questions and typing. And and it was like probably a 20-minute call. I'm like, okay, yeah, you hit the marks for postpartum anxiety. So you're gonna prescribe you whatever, main off-brand Zoloft. So, but I did start that, and honestly, it did help a lot. I think it got my brain like back to remembering like what I used to feel like and how I used to be. So that was a good thing. So I would say maybe around a year, I kind of started 1 year postpartum. I was like, okay, I feel good again. Like I feel more like myself. And I had a friend from high school that had a home birth and it looked amazing. And still at the time, I was probably like, that's fucking crazy. Who home births? Like that's
It's
from
so beautiful
crunchy.
for you and your
I'm so, yeah,
experience.
exactly. I love that for you. But I think just this little, I don't know, itch in the back of my brain was like, well, maybe you should look into that. There's midwives. Why don't you start doing some research? And the more I dug into it, the more I was like, holy shit. Like, I've been brainwashed to think that hospital birth is the safest option. You have such a much less likely chance of having a C-section or really any interventions, complications. Like, they're just so much higher at a hospital setting that once I had done all that research, I felt so much safer saying, I'm going to have a home birth and I can assert my power over my body and my baby and advocate for myself.
Just when you started talking about it, I heard your exhale.
Yeah. It really
Like,
was. It was like,
oh,
oh, yeah. It was like,
because the data does show, right? Like it is amazing that we just don't know that on our first and we think, well, you know what though? I'll do that on my second, but on my first, I'm gonna and it's like, wow, okay.
exactly.
Because that's
Exactly.
fear that's driving that because you're definitely not looking at the data, right?
Right. Right. And I also want to point out, like, that was my experience of like a white, whatever, like
Privileged,
privilege. Thank you. I'm like, couldn't come
upper
up with
middle
it. White
class,
privilege, upper middle
right?
class. I
Most
live in Southern
protected.
California. Like, I have a great job. I'm like a confident woman. And that was my experience. Like, I cannot imagine what other people go through that do not have the same privilege that I have. So
Yeah,
I
it's
think
night
it's
and day.
important to point that out. So once I started looking into it and like going over all these stats with my husband and getting his input, I was like, let's start like talking to some midwives and see what the vibe is. So I ended up interviewing like 4 different midwives before we even conceived. And uh,
That's
all of that,
fantastic.
yeah.
Everybody listen to that. Get your ears perked up before you're even pregnant. Look into interviewing a midwife. And I will tell you, there is a Christian insurance that covers home birth. And I've had
Really?
Jewish families get that insurance 6 months before they
Oh,
conceive so that they can get their home birth completely paid for. So if you know that ahead of time, You don't have to be Christian to get it, but they do cover home birth. So when people say it's $10,000, it's out of my I can't afford that, then you just need to switch your insurances early enough.
Right,
So, yeah,
right. And
before she conceived, y'all, she had already interviewed 4 midwives. I'm loving that.
yes.
Great job.
Yeah. 2 things. I think insurance companies are like getting pregnant is a life event, so they should make that you should be able to switch when you conceive. And yeah, I mean, looking into the midwife thing and starting to interview like actually got me excited to have another kid. Before I was like, I don't know how I'm gonna do this again. Like my leg thing and just the postpartum, like everything else, I don't think I can go through that again. And I also, by the way, think that like my birth experience is a direct correlation with my postpartum mood disorders. I think if I had had like the support that I even if it ended in a C-section, if I had been like supported and had a good care team, honestly, then I probably wouldn't have had the same postpartum experience. But that everything happens for a reason. And if I hadn't had that experience, I never, ever, ever would have looked into a home birth. If I had your like run of the mill, like hospital vaginal birth, I don't think I ever would have looked into it. So I am partially grateful for that experience because I had an absolutely stellar home birth. Paula was actually the fourth midwife I interviewed. I told myself I was only going to interview 3. And while I liked all of the midwives, I just didn't feel that strong bond, I guess, or I don't know, the just a vibe you get. And when I was doing some research, I told her this, like her picture from one of my Google search or whatever just kept popping up in my head. I'm like, okay, I'm going to interview a one last one. And I went and interviewed Paula, and she was amazing. She was like a mother to me, second mom.
She is the cream of the crop. You are right, and she's been delivering babies longer than anybody else here. So, yeah, she's
Yes.
amazing.
And that's what gave me like the most confidence in her. Like she's been doing it for 40 years or more. And she was very experienced in VBAC, vaginal birth after cesarean, and had like really no like concerns. And I really the vibe, I don't know if she ever actually said this to me, but like the feeling I got from her was like, I don't care if you have a home birth. I want you to have a happy, healthy, empowering, amazing birth, regardless of location. And she was obviously empathetic to my story and really excited about like that I was open to that I was looking into this path or whatever. So basically right after that meeting, I'm like, okay, found the midwife. Let's get pregnant.
Right, we can
I'm
have
ready to
sex
go.
now. Aren't you excited, Greg? We actually can have sex now.
Get excited. So yeah, we were conceived and I emailed Paula right away. We kind of started that journey process. And honestly, like the first appointment, I was just like blown away. I mean, probably even just like the interview process, I was blown away. Oh my God, wow, I sit and chat with you for an hour about like how I'm feeling and how the baby's doing. And oh, just the feeling you get from like a midwife care team versus your doctor's office. You can't even compare. It is a 180-degree different experience. So I
You're
highly
you're actually
recommend.
heard, you're seen in that moment. The predictors are they're always looking for what's right with the situation and how great everything's going instead of make sure everything's okay. Like, just it's the intention is so different in those appointments.
Yes, and just so much more detailed, like, "What's your nutrition like?" Had me do a log of the things I eat in a week, and just alternative things like not doing the glucose drink. I drank a Coca-Cola instead and did the glucose monitoring, and there's a lot of other different options that I could choose from as well to do that. And so it's just so many more choices. That's really a big thing too. You don't have just you have to do this at this time frame, and it was so easy. I looked forward to all of my appointments, and they were just amazing. The whole team, and Ariana was one of my midwives as well, part of Paula's team. She's amazing. Love her, and they just made everything like enjoyable and made me look forward to the birth.
I was just gonna say, and this time you took an out of hospital childbirth class
Yes, we did
from
the
teacher, amazing
yeah.
teacher.
Yes. So we did hypno babies, which I think she's retired now, right?
Yeah, she just
She's still doing that.
retired. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would highly recommend a hypno class of any sort. Like I've heard hypno birth is great. So I did hypno babies with Melissa, and honestly, same thing with the home birth thing. Like you think that's like hokey or whatever, but honestly, I was like, I will do whatever it takes to have a different experience. And this had come highly recommended. So I was at first I was like, this is gonna be silly, but I'm gonna put into it and hope I get out what I put in. And so I followed they give you a calendar of the classes that you should take and the tracks that you should listen to alongside the childbirth class. So basically the class setting is like more education about like childbirth, all the different stages and breastfeeding and everything you could possibly want to know. And it was mind blowing to me that I probably in every class, like I learned something new and I had already gone through pregnancy and childbirth. So highly, highly recommend taking an out of hospital childbirth class. It's just so much more in depth and helps you, I think, be a better advocate for yourself. So yeah, we did that, and I did the tracks to a T. And honestly, I like would fall asleep basically every time I would listen to one, which they said was great. It's still like you're still listening to it, and it
Yep,
honestly
that's what you're
worked.
supposed to do is fall asleep to it.
Yes. It worked for me. Like I drank the Kool-Aid and it was just like I was so chill in my labor that it's unbelievable. But I that's one of the biggest things I would probably recommend doing is as a hypno class because for me at least it worked wonders.
Yeah, the meditations chill out your brain and form new neural pathways to a more successful mindset, if anything, no matter what kind of
Yes.
birth it is. It
Yes.
chills you.
And the fear release, that was like a big part of it for me, towards once I started getting closer and closer, those fears do tend to creep in, especially with a VBAC. Can you tell people that you're having a home birth after cesarean? They look at you like you have 5 heads.
Yeah, you
Like,
don't tell them.
yeah. People, it's amazing how blunt people will be like, "Oh my god, aren't you scared?" Like, there's still things people will say to you. And I'd be like, "No, I'd be more scared to go to the hospital." But I felt like so confident in my decision. And honestly, I'm like pretty proud of myself for sticking to that because not a lot of people were super supportive. My husband was on board like 110%, which I'm so grateful to him for trusting in me and my intuition and my body. He's like, if that's where you feel most comfortable, then that's what I want you to do. So I'm like so grateful for his support. But yeah, everyone's input was fear based, and like my parents and my siblings and even Greg's family and stuff were not questioning, but what if this, what if that, which is totally normal. And I don't blame them for that. It was all out of love.
And you wanna
Um,
say, "Did you question my last birth? Because that was a show."
right. Exactly. Exactly.
And you also picked out a doula this time. So you had even
Yes.
extra
Yes.
support for this
Yes.
birth.
And the fear release, that was like a big part of it for me, towards once I started getting closer and closer, those fears do tend to
Yes.
creep in, especially with a VBAC. Can you tell people that you're having a home birth after cesarean? They look at you like you have 5 heads. It's amazing how blunt people will be like, oh my God, aren't you scared? Like, there's still things people will say to you. And I'd be like, no, I'd be more scared to go to the hospital. But I felt like so confident in my decision. And honestly, I'm like pretty proud of myself for sticking to that because not a lot of people were super supportive. My husband was on board like 110%, which I'm so grateful to him for like trusting in me and my intuition and my body. He's like, if that's where you feel most comfortable, then that's what I want you to do. So I'm like so grateful for his support. So do you want me to like just jump into the birth?
Yeah, and then labor starts. So how did that
Yes.
take place? Because second babies can come a lot faster, even if the baby came out by cesarean the first time. Like,
Yes,
people
which I
don't
was
understand
shocked.
that. Your body knows how to be pregnant. Mhm.
Yeah, even though Harper didn't fully come out the vagina, she made it pretty far down there, so kind of paved the way for Rhett. So I woke up, I want to say I was like 40 and 6, I think. That sounds right. And I had actually gone for my 40-week appointment with Ariana. We had gone to the safari park that day and we went and she was going to do a membrane sweep and she's actually, there's like nothing to sweep. So you're probably like going to go into labor soon. And so I was doing like the primrose oil, like vaginally and taking one like night and day, I think. And then I started doing like curb walking because at this point I was kind of getting uncomfortable with Harper. I really never got to that point where I was like, oh, get this baby out of me. But with Rhett, like I started being like, okay, I'm kind of done. I had a lot more stretching pains. I went to a massage therapist. That was another thing I highly recommend too, is she would could press down on it and like literally you could feel it like release and relax. It's gonna come to me at the end of the interview what the name of it is. But anyway, so I woke up on the morning of November 26th. It was like 2 days after Thanksgiving. Well, I actually woke up because my dog was barfing at the side of my bed. So I got up to clean that up. My husband was actually sleeping in the other room because I was snoring really bad. He up towards the end of my pregnancy. So like usually in the middle of the night, he'd go sleep in the other room. So I like basically picked up my dog's barf and put it in the trash and tried to get back in bed. And I noticed I was having some very light cramps. And so I put on one of my hypno tracks to try to get myself to fall back to sleep. It was like 5 in the morning, 5:30. And I kept noticing them coming. I was kind of starting to get uncomfortable. So I think I listened to that first track that was like 15 minutes. And I was like, okay, I'm going to get out of bed and roll around on the ball, wait for Harper and Rhett to wake up. They finally come in. Harper and I are like playing on the floor for a little while, come downstairs for like our usual Saturday morning routine of like coffee on the couch, watching like a nature show. And I'm still noticing the cramps, but like not they're sporadic. It's not like a rhythm yet. So I'm like kind of half-heartedly looking at the clock while we're like watching the show. And so by 8 o'clock, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna text Paula and let her know I'm having some light cramps, but like no other signs of labor yet. And so she just told me, like, have a good breakfast. It's probably gonna be a long day and let me know when they change from cramps to contractions. So I'm like, okay. And so I eat a bowl of cereal, which is like not the most nutritious breakfast.
Yeah,
But
there's the breakfast. Maybe we shouldn't tell Paula that.
don't
Wow.
tell her. Well, our microwave had stopped working, of course. So Greg was making oatmeal on the stove, which like takes forever. So I'm like, okay, while you're making the oatmeal, I'm gonna go upstairs and shower and try to get ready for the day. Maybe we can go for a walk outside with the dog and Harper, get some fresh air, and that will help things progress. So I get in the shower, and that's things like picked up in the shower a lot. And I probably stayed in there for 20 or 30 minutes, just like letting the hot water hit me. And I kept lifting my belly like up and in, and that like helped immensely. And just like, breathing and releasing my shoulders, keeping my mouth open. And in my head, I'm just like, I'm definitely in labor now, but this is very early labor. Don't get too excited. Try to ignore it as long as possible. And it was like totally manageable for pretty much through the whole thing. And so I got out of the shower, get myself dressed, and now they're starting to come like more just like a couple minutes apart. And so Greg's still downstairs making oatmeal with Harper. And so I'm literally, as I'm like trying to get ready, I'm like swaying my hips over over my sink, and it's just like breathing through them. And I'm yelling down the stairs, like, I'm having another one. So we can write it on our little log. And so by the time I come downstairs, and I also put my shoes on myself, which I just think is, I'm pretty impressed. Like
I
I
mean,
like
you
leaned
were going
down
on a
and
walk,
I
so
was going on
you
a
had to be
walk.
ready.
Had to get ready. So, and during that point, like Greg had come upstairs. I'm like, okay, I think you need to call my mom and tell her, because Harper's 2 at the time, and she's, asking a million questions and bouncing off the walls as she does. So like, okay, we need some more support. I need you to pay attention to me, and she's needing you to pay attention to her too. So my mom, of course, my parents are like also renovating their house. So I was like, oh, well, we're painting right now, but we'll wrap it up and I'll head over. Like, okay, try to be quick. Well, I'm like, leave dad there. Just you come soon. And so, yeah. And I also had texted Paula. I'm like, okay, they've changed from cramps to contractions, I'd say. And that was that. I'm kind of losing the timeline. But so 8 o'clock, I did the initial text. Getting out of the shower, I would say it was like 9 o'clock, like 8:45, 9. Okay, I think they're contractions now. So by the time I come downstairs, like dressed and ready to go, it's 9:15. And I'm like walking around our kitchen island, and I'm like, I don't think I can go on this walk. The contractions are starting to come. I can't tell really when one is ending and another one's beginning. And I had this weird euphoric moment at our backslider. Our backyard faces east, and it's still morning time and the sun is coming up, and it seemed like it was like shining through the crown of this really big tree that we have on our hillside. And the leaves were like just changing from red to yellow. It was end of November. And it was just like, I can't describe it, but it was like a psychedelic experience. It like just looked so beautiful. And I kept pausing at the backslider, like every time I would make my loop and just be mesmerized by it. I don't know. It was the weirdest thing. But I've heard about having those like euphoric moments in labor, but that was like definitely one that like stands out to me. That was like I had this like rush of oxytocin or whatever it was. It was beautiful. Um,
And I love that you
so
took the time to notice it and take it in because that's a core memory now of your birth.
yes, yeah, and I think it like it was like almost a reminder to take deep breaths and just release it. So
Copy
I
nature because what's happening is exactly the way it should be.
yes, yes.
So
So
sexy.
still in my mind, even though contractions are like on top of each other, I'm still like I'm in early labor. Okay. Obviously, it's only been like an hour basically since it's changed from like cramps to contractions. So I still did not think the baby is coming. So I'm like, okay, I think you should call Paula and tell her like that they're coming pretty quickly now. And so Greg calls and she didn't answer at first. So he calls Kim. Like Kim's, oh, I'm on like a nature walk with my daughter. Like I'll head home and I'll get there in the next hour. I'm like, okay. But that seems like reasonable at the time. So I'm like, oh, I'm probably not gonna have the baby until like tonight. So then Paula calls back and Greg's giving her the log. Like it's been every couple of minutes and now they're kind of on top of each other. And she's okay, well, you're still probably gonna be in labor for a while, but I'll head over in the next hour also and see what's going on. So we're like, okay.
An hour feels like eternity when they're like that.
Yeah. So I think I was like, I'm okay. But you're just like, you still think like it's not happening anytime soon. So and you hear so much about like, don't call until it's like time. So you like don't want them to come and then be sitting around. So that was like I want to say 9 by the time I finished calling him, because I kind of kept pretty good track at the time. I like wrote it all down like right after it happened. Is it like 9:18? And then by 9:25, I was like in the other room on our rug, like on hands and knees. And all like my body just started pushing. Like I could just feel like my abs like start since doing that. And I'm like, Greg, you need to call Paula back right now and tell her that my body is pushing. I don't think I even referenced it as myself. Like my body was just doing it. And
Is.
so yeah, like I wasn't there. Makes like my body was just like it was happening. So calls her back at 9:25, so 7 minutes from like the previous call where she's, "I'll be there in an hour." And she later said she was like literally getting in the shower when Greg called the second time. And she, okay, I'm on my way. She like ran out to the car. She said she like ran 4 red lights. And in our previous appointments, she was saying like, I have a feeling your baby's gonna come fast. So I thought that was kind of funny. So she like
Well,
rushed
and I want to
over.
say to our listeners, if you're listening to this, labor starts, she just does her thing. She eats, she's ignoring, she's following her body. She gets in the shower. There's no vaginal checks. There's nobody attending to her. There's nobody giving her guidance. Then her body starts to push. So if nobody shows up, she's having a baby because that's what our bodies are meant to do. And because she had had practice and faced her fears and worked hard at her mindset, she was in a position to allow nature to unfold as it should unfold. It's beautiful.
Right.
Keep going.
Yeah. It was awesome. So at this point, she's okay. You need to get her upstairs before she can't move anymore. This is Paula, and start setting up the room. We have this whole birthday like kit and bags of towels and all that kind of stuff. So at first, I'm like, okay, get me to the bathroom because I'm sure as most people that have had a baby know, when you're going through labor, like everything is eliminating itself from your body basically. So at this point, I'm like, I'm going to check myself because my body is pushing. So I like figure out then I can't feel anything, but it's definitely like lot more mucus and blood. Sorry if that's TMI, but this
That's
is a
what it
birth
is.
podcast, right? But I was relieved that I like couldn't feel like a head or anything. But I noticed like when I was like looking at my hands and they were like bloody or whatever, my hands were like shaking uncontrollably. I was like, oh, at the time you don't register, but I think that was probably transition.
Yeah, hormones.
Um, hormones. So Greg gets me upstairs. And as a reminder, it's still just Greg and Harper and me at the house. So Harper's still very much bouncing off the walls all around us. So Greg gets me upstairs. He puts like a towel underneath me and takes off. I was wearing a dress and a sweater, takes everything, all my shoes off, my socks, and I kept like my bra and my underwear. He offered to take my underwear off. Like, absolutely not. Because every contraction, I felt like I was just like shitting my pants. There's no other way to say it. So
Right.
not, and you don't know, like I didn't know. Is there, am I don't possibly. So when he thought like, no. So Harper took that cue as, oh, we're getting undressed now. Okay, great. She took all her clothes off. And she was literally the best little doula. Like, I feel like she's going to be a birth worker in her future because she just stood there right next to me. Once it kind of got to this like intense part where I'm like on my hands and knees and I'm like breathing really methodically, she was like kissing my shoulder, and kissing my cheek, and rubbing my back, and just being so encouraged. You're doing a great job, mama. Like, you're doing great. It was just amazing. A couple times she said, are you okay? And I just told her, like, mommy's working really hard to get the baby out. Like, baby's gonna come today. And so she was like excited and calm. And it was just like, it was amazing. So it was kind of funny considering I didn't think that she was going to be there in the first place. I thought my mom would come and kind of like take her.
Painting, so.
And that mom was painting the way out. And there was no time to call again to say, it's happening. You need to come right now. So I'm like on hands and knees. Greg is like running around like a little chicken with his head cut off, trying to get the room set up. Get like we have to put like a sleeve thing over the bed, send new sheets, and the whole gamut. I had made these little like cards, like cards of affirmation that are like, this is hard, but you can do hard things, and contractions can't be stronger than me because they are me, like that kind of thing. So that was like kind of a funny moment. Greg's like literally reading them like they're flashcards, and he's quizzing me like Jeopardy questions. And like throwing them on the floor in front of me. He's standing and I let him to these. I just looked at him. I'm like, you need to go away. That's funny little like side bit. I'll just go back to whatever you were doing. Like, don't.
Get the plastic on the bed, man. Just get the plastic on the bed.
Yes. And at one point I remember yelling out like, where is everybody? But it had been like 10 minutes, like they were on their way. But so finally I'm like, okay, I have to do something. So I got in the shower, on hands and knees, still in like my bra and underwear, and just like literally put like the maximum heat on the shower and put it on my back. I don't know why I didn't get in the tub. We have a tub, but I think that they thought that that would make things progress quicker. And so they're like, make sure she doesn't get in the tub. So I didn't get in the tub. I'm like, I have to get in the shower. I need like water. I just knew water was going to equal relief. So and that was like fantastic. I was probably in there for another 10 minutes. And finally I saw Greg carry up like this big black box that was like Paula's kit. And I was like, oh my God, the wave of relief that I felt when I saw that big black box. And she came in and she was just like, oh, just that feeling you get when like someone you love comes into the room. You're like, oh my God. She came and opened the shower door. She's like, is it okay if I check you? Like, sure. So she checked it. Oh yes. The baby is like coming. Jane is there. And I'm like, okay, does that mean I'm complete? Like I'm ready? And she's, yeah. Because
She
it's
hit
still
ahead.
in my head. Yeah, exactly. It's still in my head. I'm like, am I still in early labor? So it was kind of just like, I don't, a whirlwind, like mind blowing. When she was like, okay, yeah, baby's there.
Second
I'm like, no, like
babies.
I've only been having contractions for an hour. And actually, before she got there, I had checked again and I did feel something, but it was like super slimy and I thought it was my bag of waters. But I think actually it was the head because they hadn't, when I was actually pushing, I checked again, it was that same feel. And I'm like, oh shit, that was the head that I was feeling, not just my waters. So my waters had broke at some point, probably like in the shower, I think on the first time, and I just didn't know it. So she's like, okay, well, let's get you dried off unless you want to have your baby on the shower floor. No, I don't. Let's go to the bed. So she and Greg dragged me off, walked me over to the bed. And she got there, I think at 9:55 a.m. and walked me over to the bed. And I'm like still on hands and knees. And I think she had checked they're doing sporadic heart monitoring. And she's okay, baby doesn't love that position. Let's try. Can you do a side lying? So I did that. And heart tones went back to normal. And I think I pushed for a couple of minutes. And at one point, I'm like, am I close? And Greg is filming this whole thing. He's holding Harper and filming the full thing. And literally the bed, his head is like there. I'm like, am I close? It's just like kind of crazy the chemical concoction your body can come up with because I can't believe like I did what I did and how quickly it all transpired and that I like stayed pretty calm. Like throughout. Yeah. So she gets there and then within like in 5-minute increments, then like Ariana gets there and then Kim, my doula, and then my mom. So basically, like Rhett's head was like out, and my mom, you can see her in the shot, just comes straight up to me, and she's like, she could not believe, oh my god, like you're literally having the baby.
I told you to put your paintbrush down. I
I
told you.
know, exactly. Well, she wanted to wait for my dad. My dad wanted to come. He had phone off. So he stayed downstairs, of course. But so yeah, they're like, yeah, the baby's closed. Keep pushing. So every contraction, I'm like pushing, and oh, like I can say every part of it, I was pain free except for that ring of fire. That is 100% a real thing. I was like, oh, I
Can be
like
intense.
in the video. I'm like, oh, that's fiery. It's like very fiery. So I kind of just was like, okay, I'm going to push through this because it's going to be fire until his head is out. So just pushed his little head out, and he did have a cord around his neck, but basically he just like, flopped out on the next contraction, and Paula kind of like untangled him and put him right up on me. And it I when she like lifted him up, we didn't know the gender. I saw his like little balls hanging. I was like, what did Gregor? I said, it's a boy. So it was amazing. It was amazing. There's no other word to describe it.
The euphoria for having a VBAC when you had the kind of birth you had before, so night and day, and Harper was there, and you had an amazing team and your parents. What did that feel like in the aftermath?
Oh, just so like validating, like my own validation. It's just amazing. I feel like I like took my power back, and I like stood up to the man. I feel like I know a lot of people that would have different reactions to that same experience, and every reaction is valid. For me, like I just felt so, I guess, like victimized, I guess, and I don't want to be a victim. And I don't know, I'm kind of that, I feel like a type of person that like if you tell me I can't do something, then I'm going to do it, and I'm going to like do it with flying colors. And I just felt like I had to prove those people wrong. It's hard to describe that feeling of being like disempowered and like being put in my place, and then being like, you know what? What that? Like I can do this. I got this. And it was just like, yeah, there's no other word other than empowering and like validating and healing. It was wow. I was right the whole time. 'Cause I do feel like if I had some sort of like support person, a doula in Harper's birth, like I 100% would not have had a C-section. I firmly believe that. I don't think that was an emergency C-section. I think it was an unnecessary C-section. It was not a failure to progress. It was a failure to be patient. And there's just so many things that could have been done differently, even just like waiting to push until she had come down, or not breaking my waters intentionally. And I mean, you could go, there's a laundry list of things you could go down and say, I should have done this differently, I should have done that. So you hold a certain amount of, like we talked about earlier, like guilt that I didn't educate myself, and that my birth was in my hands. And instead of holding it in my hands, I handed it to somebody else to tell me what was best for me. And that was just like such an eye-opening experience. No, I'm gonna hold that power in my hands. And I know what's best for me and my baby because I'm carrying them. I have a mother's intuition. And after Harker's birth, I thought that was a crazy thing to think like that I know better than a doctor about my baby. Like how could I think that? And I'm like, what's so sad? I feel I learned a lot about myself and so many things. I think my eyes were just so open to birth culture in our country, and when it goes, it's just like women's rights and so many things that I think are just like overlooked. And we just kind of like fall into this spinning wheel of this is the way that it's done without thinking things through, or with really without having all of the facts. I just don't think I had all the facts that I should have had when back then. So anyway,
Well, and I think
um,
it goes back to we aren't supported as women birthing people in the United States at all, in that
yeah,
we have 9 to 5 jobs. We have powerful jobs. We make decisions for ourselves all the time. We know when we feel sick. We are autonomous human beings, but we have been so groomed that once we step into the medical world, we are inept. We are wrong. We don't have enough degrees. We just are stupid. And why we play into that is because we've been groomed from the time we were Harper's age, right? Every time we watch TV, it was belittling that crazy hysterical woman screaming in childbirth. Why can't she handle it? Let us take care of it. And birth
Right.
is pathologized. It's a disease, whereas it's not. It's something
Right.
natural that every mammal does.
Right.
It's birth. It's how we're formed. But yeah, we voluntarily give up our power because it's expected of us.
Right.
And you just showed
Right.
them it's not how it has to
Yeah.
be.
Yeah, and being serious, it's the only thing you go to the hospital for that's like a happy thing. The other times are all emergencies or there's something wrong. And as soon as you walk through those doors, whether you're having a baby or you're having knee surgery or you're there for cancer treatment, like you're there because something is wrong with you and they need to fix you and help you. And you automatically are handing over your power. And I 100% believe you can have an unmedicated empowering birth in the hospital, you're just gonna have to fight for it
Or
in most
come at the very
cases.
when there's no
Or
time to
come at
do
the very end.
interventions,
Exactly. Yes. And
right?
obviously there are tons of great doctors and nurses out there. I do believe that. I didn't get to really experience. But everyone's interpretation of their own experience is different. Somebody could go through the exact same thing that I went through and come out with a totally different perspective. And I know lots of moms that friends of mine that have also had traumatic experiences, in my view, from doctor interventions and being induced and all this stuff. And to them, the healing thing to do is to have a repeat cesarean so that it's scheduled and they can control it and that can be healing for those people. For me, it was saying like, fuck that. I'm not going to be like taken advantage of and abused and violated and belittled and take that and be like, "Yes, please give me more info. Let me come back to you and have more of that. Have you control my birth of my baby." That I firmly felt very passionately that like I couldn't do that. I'm not gonna I want to have control of my own birth experience and take control of whatever happens, good or bad, whether I think that what we talked about in the beginning, like taking the power of the decisions of whether I have to be transferred or whatever the case may be. Like those are my decisions to make and not a doctor telling me like this is what you have to do. So it was
Absolutely. And I appreciate you wanting to come on to let first time moms know, even before they're pregnant. Please share this with everybody that's not pregnant so they can make different decisions, possibly about care providers, interviewing their birth team, insurance costs, all of that kind of stuff. The earlier is always better for more control over the kind of craziness of birth. But thank you for allowing your story to be told so that other women can go, oh, let's start using our critical thinking before we get wrapped up in something we feel like we can't get out of, like you did at 38 weeks. Oh, red flags all around me, but it's too late to switch. It'll take too much time because we're tired at the end of pregnancy. And we
right.
have that delusion that it's not going to happen to me,
Right.
but it
Exactly.
could.
But it could. And I can't remember if we said this on the recording or not, but like your birth is going to stay with you forever. And pre Harper, I did not have an understanding of what that meant and how monumental her birth was going to be. And so that I think that was my biggest takeaway that I would tell people. And that's not to scare you. It should be like a super exciting thing because Rats was the opposite. I mean, to go from disempowered to empowered and everything in between that, but just like realizing how impactful their births can be on your life. If you have a pause in birth, whether that means it's in the hospital or at home or at a birth center or it's a vaginal birth or C-section, like if it's an empowered on your terms, you feel like you conquered the world. Like you created this perfect little human being. Like you grew a whole person in your body. Like it still blows my mind that women can do that. So I think women should be proud of themselves and they should, take the time to educate themselves and hand pick your birth team because it is going to impact you more than you know. And yeah, that's cool. It's very
You're absolutely right. It doesn't matter if the baby comes out the sunroof or the front door. If you felt
right.
like you were heard and listened to, and there are people that gave you compassion and walked you through the experience and explained what's going on along the way, and you had the time to make choices and decisions, you have a beautiful birth experience.
Yes. Yeah. And both of them are something that I think about every single day, like multiple times a day, especially Harper's. That's just something that like has been on my heart for 3.5 years. And I've wanted to share her story, but there's so much stigma out there about, I don't know, women sharing like negative birth stories or traumatic experiences. But I think it's important to
To help
open our
prevent other
eyes.
ones.
Yes, if I could prevent that from happening, when I hear pregnant women I know or friends or whatever saying like, "Oh, like I'm just gonna go with the flow, like I'm not gonna take any birth classes." Oh my god, I literally like my anxiety spikes for them because you can't tell someone else what to do, but I don't want to scare anyone and be like, "Oh my god, let me tell you all about my birth experience," because it is such a sensitive time, and you don't want to scare anyone or step on anyone's toes or whatever. But yeah, I it's still something that I get anxiety about just thinking about sometimes if I start thinking about all the interventions and just like going through the scenes of her birth. It's still something that I'm healing from and gone to lots of therapy for. And so I just think women need to know it's gonna play a big part in their life. So make sure you as much as you can. Of course, a lot about birth is out of your hands. Some people need medical intervention, and thank God we have trained surgeons and doctors that can handle those emergencies. I don't want to take away from that at all. I think it's great that we have those resources available if they're needed, but they're 100% being overused and pushed on moms when they wouldn't be. And I 100% believe that if less women were induced or recommending waters be broken and this and that and the other, like our C-section rate would be way lower. Our maternal and fetal mortality rate would likely be way lower. I think there's just so many obvious things that our medical care teams and systems could be doing to prevent a lot of these traumas, whether it's physical or mental. And they're not, they're pushing them more and more and more. So we have to, I guess, we have to stand up
Well, we
and
kinda have to
not,
take it seriously, and go with the flow
yeah.
has a different meaning when it comes to our medical system.
Yes,
So and there's
100%.
a difference in trauma dumping a bad birth story on people, in explaining the mistakes that I made along the way, how it made me feel, and then what I did to change it. And that's the important part of this whole show today, because it wasn't trauma dumping, it was things I wish I had known. Hindsight is 2020. Let me help you to
Yes,
something that's more beautiful the first time instead of doing what I did on the first one, because we
100%.
all have hindsight. And I think
Yes,
that comes from our wisdom and growing old. And I think you're going to keep passing that on, just like Paula and Kim, etc., with
yes,
their wise
yeah,
woman
and listen to your
beautifulness.
intuition. Listen to your intuition because my intuition was trying to tell me in Harper's, like, these red flags but you feel stuck, and so I would just encourage and even with the home birth, like, that took a lot for me to kinda go outside that bubble because I'm not, like, crunchy, super holistic. Like, I try to be more natural on some things, but, I'm human. But in my family, that was, like, really a big deal. Like, my brother's a firefighter, and my family was not super on board to begin with. But my intuition told me that I should do this. Something in the back of my brain was like, I can do it. And I think this is the best choice for me. And so I did. And I'm like so glad that I did. And I think I hopefully opened some eyes, my friends and family that previously would be like, oh, I would never do that. I hope that I would encourage someone to at least look into it and do your research and do what feels safest and right to you, because that can mean something different for everyone. But to me, home felt safest. And yeah, I just felt so confident in my care team. And I was rewarded for listening to that intuition. I had a totally redemptive 180-degree different experience, and I will be so grateful for the rest of my life. Like I just loved everything about it. So
So beautiful, Katie. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you, Greg, for taking the kids sat this morning for that. And we will see everybody next week.
thanks, Care.
Thanks for joining us today. And remember, it's your body, your choice, and finding your voice is your power. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us in all the places, and go to birtheducationcenter.com for our blog and more online education classes. And we'll see you next week.